So like I say, my name is Martin Catherall. I work for a company in Australia. So I'm based in Australia at the minute. Mark introduced me as being a native of New Zealand. I should have clarified that. I'm actually from the UK originally. My wife is actually the New Zealander. Cheers, Mark. And I moved over to New Zealand, probably about 20, 25 years ago. Spent about, I don't know, about 15, 17 years in New Zealand. And now I'm based in Australia, Melbourne to start with, and then Brisbane. So I work for a company called BitQ, and they call me a data specialist. In reality, what does that mean? Pretty much means any kind of data thing that comes up on a Microsoft platform, I can take over or work with or whatever. Anything from writing strategies to getting your hands dirty, whatever comes up. Yeah. So let's kind of start. So I'm talking about the end-to-end kind of process, technical, strategic, whatever you want that to be. So kind of aim a bit of a rhetorical question at all of you. So, if you encounter an end-to-end project, so, your boss comes and says, yeah, hey, we've got an end-to-end project to do, whether it's in Microsoft Fabric, Synapse, AWS, whatever it is. What does end-to-end mean to you? Just some ideas that I'm throwing around. Does it mean design? Are you designing things from the inception, like where we're starting? We might start a project today, and we're due to be finished in a month's time, 2 months' time. Is that end to end? The whole time it's going to take to do the design, the implementation, whatever it is. Is that what end to end means to you? And it might well be. Or does it mean the path that the data takes? So from the source right through to the end, so the visualization. So you might be grabbing data from, a Azure blob storage account, or I don't know, Orion, a HR system, or whatever. That might be the source. Bringing that in to your system, be that Synapse, Fabric, whatever it is, and then you might be visualizing it somehow. So all that data is going on an end-to-end journey. It's starting at one point and it's finishing at another point where it's visualized, and your company or whoever you're working for is getting real good value from it. And that's kind of end-to-end as well. Or does it mean, the history of how things have happened? Like, so if you look at the history of kind of our data industry, really, in a couple of sentences, that can span probably the memories of all the people on this call. Starting off with databases like Oracle, SQL Server came along a bit after Oracle. The history of how they've developed, the intricacies of the platform, and the experience, the technology, how it's evolved. Now we're talking about, it's gone to IaaS, it's gone to PaaS, and now we're talking about Fabric, and we're talking about SaaS. Is that what end to end means to you, or does it mean a bit of a mishmash of everything here? And I think putting together that mishmash of technology, of knowing a bit about the history, knowing how to design something, that union of everything kind of results in a bit of a win-win situation for everyone. If I look back at my own history, about 20, 25 years ago, I started playing around with SQL Server. I had a bit of an interest in IT before that, but that's when I really got started. I really got my first job in IT, and I was a database developer, developed SQL Server stuff. And over the course of, I would say, the next 10 or 15 years, I met various people, people like Mark, people like other MVPs, some real big names in our industry, and got to learn off them, not just about how databases work, about how the specific product that I was dealing with implements things in the code, basically, how it works under the covers, what the physical implications are of making decisions about, say, unique data that's in there, or primary keys or indexes or all that sort of detail that can, that can make a real big difference down the track, and helps us create, sustainable, forward-thinking software that's not going to, be great when we deploy it, and then after a couple of years, when it's helped the company who developed it grow and they've got more customers, there's more data going in, that suddenly hits a tipping point where it's like no longer useful, or people are beginning to put fixes in to hold things together with bits of string and bits of tape, and just make a real sustainable component that's good for us, it's good for the company where our clients, and moves us all forward. I think that's really where we want to go as people and as like an industry in general. So, looking at this through different lenses, complementary tech. And I know we're probably talking here about just a Microsoft platform, but might be other things involved, other systems, complementing them, talking to people, getting, doesn't have to be I said grand designs, grand outcomes, sustainability, but we just want something that's simple but not too simple, simple enough to work, and provide win-win situations for everyone. So let's get into this. So whenever I go to a client, I start on a project, whatever project that is, I kind of ask myself one question to start off with. You probably take this up with your company before you actually go to the client, but you probably want to know in advance. So what type of clients have we got? Have we got someone who's really interested in being cloud native? So do they want to take the data and move it to the cloud? Whether that's Power BI, whether that's Synapse, AWS, whatever, are they really open to moving from, say, on-prem into the cloud? And they've got no issues with it ever. They've looked at the bigger picture, they've analysed security, industry trends, where things are going, and they're like, all right, okay, we're all on board. Absolutely great. And that type of client is great. We don't meet them too often, but sometimes we do. And when we do, absolutely fabulous. Or do we have someone who's kind of, I call them cloud friendly. So they're kind of open to move into the cloud, but they've got a few problems, things that might hold them back. They're a bit skeptical about security. They're wondering how the data's going to move there, about migrations. Is the migration going to have problems? They're kind of thinking there's a fair few blockers here, and we're not sure about this. And it's we got a bit more of a job here. We got to, persuade them that the move's going to go to plan. Sure, there's going to be issues, but can they overcome them, and can we help them overcome? Basically, they're not too far away from cloud native, but they've got a few issues that they want to resolve. We can help them resolve. So the two of them are kind of great if you see them. The other one is what I call cloud conservative. They're not cloud friendly. They're kind of the other way around from cloud friendly. They might entertain the prospect of going to the cloud, but they've got a lot more issues. They want to stay on-prem. Maybe all their staff or all their resources, don't really like that, using that word about people in general, but maybe everyone is not so keen on going to the cloud. Some people might be even against it totally. We've got a bit more work to do there than the cloud friendly type, but we can still approach it in a slightly different way and just help them on that journey to maybe move towards the cloud if they want, or maybe they can move little bits into the cloud. Like maybe they could have Power BI that pulls all its data from an on-prem. So the data's staying on-prem, but they're pulling the data into Power BI, and it's all in the cloud there, it's sitting in the Power BI space. And they're happy with that. That's maybe a good start. Maybe it isn't. Maybe they need some kind of other solution or other driver to get them along the track. And the last one is pretty much exactly the opposite of the cloud native, and pretty much cloud unfriendly. They're going to stay on-prem, whatever the reason. And that might be a really good reason. That might be their security, their compliance, whatever it is, says they can't go to the cloud. So it could be that they've got their own blockers for going to the cloud. It could be that they just don't want to go to the cloud. Any number of reasons, but essentially they're not even going to entertain the prospect of going to the cloud. And then, yeah, I guess we got a decision then. Do we take on the work as cloud consultants? Obviously, we've all got backgrounds of probably on-prem stuff. Do we take on that, or do we, walk away? And obviously, getting work is why we're all here. So I've got to kind of balance that with other things at the time. So that's what I really ask myself, whether I'm picking something up to write a proposal or strategy, whatever it is, or whether someone else has wrote it and I'm going to the client for the first time. Maybe I won't ask the client directly these questions. There'll be a dialogue, and we'll pick up over time what box they might fit into and how we can help them, whatever box that is. So the agenda for today, I'll really give a bit of an intro already into some things, but I'm just going to gloss. Well, I'll talk about PaaS and I'll talk about Synapse a little bit, but that's not the main focus of the presentation itself. It's more how we got there rather than anything else. And then I'm going to talk about SaaS. I'm going to talk about Fabric, and I'm going to do a complete end-to-end demo of Microsoft Fabric. Now, a bit about how I'm going to do that. I've attempted previously to do this in real time, so to build out the solution in real time, and that's possible. But I can run into all sorts of problems. So what I've done is I've previously prepared it. I've recorded the demo, and the demo goes end to end. I will play the demo. I will talk over the demo. I'm not just going to play a recording. I'll pause it when I need to. I'll talk about various things that come up as part of that demo, and yeah, it'll be end to end. Now, apart from that, I have actually completed the demo, so I've got a complete live working version of it. And if we need to go away and look at that version or examine it in detail, that's what we'll do. The demo recording is really just meant to save time, rather than me clicking around something, and every time a web page loads, it takes 20-30 seconds, and everyone's sitting there going, "Oh god, this ain't great." So that's where I'm coming from with that. So let's get into it. So our industry in general, over the years, is obviously changed, as we all know. We start with IaaS and IaaS on-prem. I've really bunched them into the same bucket, if you like. Obviously, IaaS, and that is in a data center somewhere, but it's virtual machines, very analogous to hardware. Obviously, there's bits of difference. I'm not going to dwell on that during this presentation, but it's kind of there, and it's kind of it was how we, our springboard to getting in the cloud, if you like. And when I talked about cloud native and cloud friendly before, I guess I don't really see IaaS itself as being massively cloud friendly. I mean, picking a machine up, a hardware based machine from on-prem, and moving it to a virtual machine in the cloud. I mean, yeah, okay, so it's gone to the cloud, but are you really leveraging the true power of the cloud there? Maybe to a certain degree. You can elastically scale and you can do certain things that you can't do on-prem, but you're not really leveraging the true power of like PaaS. So, PaaS, Synapse, ADF, all that sort of thing. Microsoft talks about, well, all the cloud vendors talk about infinite scale and scaling up and all that. And I think that's where the true power of the cloud lies. And so yeah, PaaS is kind of where most people are in the cloud at the moment. And then there's obviously SaaS, where I guess we're familiar with a lot of SaaS applications, CRMs, SharePoint Online, that sort of thing. And now we're talking about Fabric as being a SaaS offering. And I don't know, I guess you probably have to make your own mind up on whether it is a true SaaS offering. Sure, it's it's baked into one interface, that familiar Power BI interface, and we can now do our data movements and our data warehousing and our notebooks, and we can do everything in the same interface. And from that perspective, it's really good. But maybe in a traditional SaaS system, we're not really worried about too much about managing the data and that sort of stuff ourselves. Well, we still get to do that, and that's a good thing. I really do think that's a good thing. We get to do that in Fabric. So we haven't lost complete control. It's not about giving over complete control to someone else. We've still got the ability to be very flexible, to design things ourselves, and go whichever way we want to do. So that flexibility, I think, is really important in our industry. So how did I sort of come up with this presentation to start with? So I went to a client and they wanted me to design an end-to-end system, and they already had this, what we're looking at the minute. They had batch data sources on one side and they had Power BI on the other side. And they'd say about 3 years ago, they'd started on this journey themselves. They'd obviously had an internal conversation about reporting, and they'd analysed various reporting applications and decided they were going to go with Power BI. This was a reasonably big organisation, actually a government organisation, big by Australian standards, probably got about 500 people there, but they'd had no real reporting application. They had no real internal reporting skills, but they had a few people there who were kind of interested in Power BI, and kind of put something together initially. They'd impress people, and the organisation had said, well, that's great, let's go on this journey, let's put some Power BI reports together, and let's see where it goes. So they had a mishmash of import models and direct queries and combinations of the two, and it was pretty good. If you went in there and just seen this for the first time, you'd probably be reasonably impressed with the reports. And plus, the staff who developed this over time and obviously upskilled themselves and done pretty well. So they said to us, what we want you to do is replace this middle bit. We want this middle bit gone because it's basically going straight into Power BI, and we want something in the middle. We're really open to a lot of ideas, what it is or what it isn't at this point, but we want something like, and I use the term data warehouse for want of a better word. We want a data warehouse or something like that in the middle where we can refine all our data, merge it all, and bring it together. So, essentially what they had to start with was each individual batch data source they had its own set of reports. So, application A, we pulled data from application A and reported on that alone. Application B, we pulled data from that, reported on that alone. So they had no real crossover between what was happening in A and what was happening in B. They couldn't correlate them two things together. And so this is why they wanted a solution in the middle so they could bring all this data and get real value out of the business. And they were like, right, how are we going to do that? So this was before Fabric came out as even in public preview, but I was kind of aware of it in private preview, and it was a good thing for me to look at the Synapse angle, which is actually where they went initially, because they didn't want to wait for Fabric, and I looked at it as Fabric as well and kind of compared the two sort of in my own mind. I had an NDA with Microsoft at the time. I couldn't talk about it, and they weren't interested in going on a private preview program for it. But it was a good little exercise for kind of myself to do. So you want to get rid of the Power BI. Well, you want to get rid of the middle bit, but you want to keep the Power BI on the outside. So one of the things we like to do, or some of my colleagues like to do when they go into things like this. So if I just back up a minute, so they already had Power BI there. They'd upskilled themselves and they'd got to a stage where they had some people on board who are pretty good with Power BI, but obviously the industry we work in, that's our bread and butter. I personally am not a big Power BI guy, but some of the people I work with are. But we want to bring on board these Power BI people from within the organization, but they've got a lot of knowledge, industry knowledge. They built these reports. Like it's very unlikely that we're going to be able to use the same model as they've got. And we're going to have to create a different model. But we want the reports to kind of look the same. They can be made better, but essentially we want to keep the same reports. And it's not going to take as long as it did initially to create them reports, but the people who've already created them can probably create them relatively quickly off a new model. So we want to kind of gauge, I would say, skill level and know-how of these people. And we're not looking to, disparage people or anything. We just want to, I don't know, see where we are, so to speak. So I've kind of put a bit of a different spin on this for the purpose of this presentation, and I'm going to ask rhetorically, but you can put your answers in the chat if you want, and we can gauge what's happening here. So I've got 4 Power BI files. So the first one's got 2 rows, and those 2 rows contain a first name and a last name. Might be Martin Catherall, might be Mark, might be whoever's name. Anyway, it's got 2 rows. Second one has got 2 rows as well. And those 2 rows contain a start date and they contain an end date. So that's the first 2 files. The second one contains 1 billion rows. It's a Power BI file. These are all Power BI files, by the way. They're all PBIX files. Second one contains 1 billion rows. The next one contains 20 million rows. And what I want to say is over here, I'm going to put up 4 sizes of the files. Now, they're just spread out randomly here. So one of these files is 553 megabytes big. The other one is 38 kilobytes, 24 kilobytes, and 25 megabytes. And so if I ask you like rhetorically, or you can post things in the chat, discussion points, come off mute if you want, which one is the biggest? Which one would you expect to be the biggest? Why would you expect the one you picked to be the biggest? And why would you pick the one you have not picked to be the smallest? And it seems a really kind of easy question. It's like, oh, this has got 1 billion rows in there. That looks like it is a candidate to be the biggest. So I don't know. I'm going to just stop sharing my screen a minute. Just so if anyone does want to post in chat, you don't have to. The only reason I'm stopped sharing my screen is so I can actually see the chat if anyone is actually going to put anything in there. But it just take about 5 minutes or so. Just wonder if anyone's got any thoughts on what would be the biggest or what would be the smallest. And while I'm waiting for anyone to put things in the chat, I'll just read some of these questions here.
So they can't see on screen what the choices are.
Oh, right. Okay. Sorry.
To be able to respond.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, Mark. I won't share my screen. That didn't work very well. So the choices are basically okay. So let's go with this. What's the biggest file? So which one of those files would you expect to be the one that's 553 megabytes? Yeah, I'll just talk through this. I'll give the answers out. So I'm not really looking here for people to say, oh, this is the biggest. That's the biggest. Sorry.
I don't know if you can see what's going in the chat, but I could read off a couple of them if you.
Yeah.
That's
read
helpful.
Yeah.
So Heidi's here. Hello, Heidi. Would it depend on what data column is in the 1 million and 1 billion rows? It's like it would be helpful to know that, right? Gonzalo is names are biggest, dates smaller, the others if integer then smallest. Yeah. Then Oscar, the biggest is the one with 2 rows. Okay. Gonzalo added to his about the largest and smallest because of compression. I think is what he's saying.
Yeah.
Kerry says billion row table, I think would probably be the biggest.
Yeah.
Those are
okay,
responses.
That's cool. Yeah, and they're all good responses. And I guess one of the things I'd be looking for here is like, Heidi's question, or is it Oscar's question? What is in that billion row table? What data types are in there? What data is in there? What's in the 200 billion row table? I think it was Oscar's answer. He said the biggest one is the one with 2 rows. I go, yeah, maybe it is. Why is that so? I would bother going backwards and forwards. I'll just like give the answers out here, so we can like move on a little bit. But the biggest table there is the 20 million row table. So that 20 million row table is 553 megabytes big, and it's basically got 20 million rows in it that are not compressible. So it's got one column, it's got one GUID column, and 20 million rows in there. Can't compress it. End of story. So that's the biggest file. Okay, the smallest file, or I can't remember if it's dead set smallest or near smallest, is actually the 1 billion row table. So the 1 billion row table has only actually got 2 values in it. It's got 1 and 2. So it's got 500 million rows of 1s and 500 million rows of 2s. So it is really compressible. And while that's just a contrived example, it just kind of conveyed the point that, if you've got data that reoccurs a lot, then the compression is going to be really fabulous. So, it's got a billion rows in there, and it's like 24, 25 megabytes big. The biggest one, you might be surprised to know, and it's probably the correct answer by I think it was Oscar, was the 2 rows with the start date and the end date in there. And you might think, oh, why is that? 2 rows, start date and end date. Well, though each column, like the start date, has got a date in there from, like, say 2000, which is a start date, and the end date is, the next row is like 999, like the biggest date you can get. So there's a massive difference between the start date and the end date. And what Power BI is doing behind the scenes there is creating a date table. Well, it's actually creating 2 date tables in this case, because there's 2 columns with dates in there. So for each column, it's creating a date table. So it's creating 2 absolutely huge date tables in our model. And it really didn't need to. That is just a setting in Power BI. You can turn that off, and I'd advise you to do that, and just create your own date tables. Just take charge of it yourself, and then you'll reduce the size massively of your model. As soon as some of these models start getting really big, they start taking a lot of time to open, and that is one of the problems that I've seen in the client scenario I've got here. So the questions that people had there, for example, Heidi, and just while I'm thinking about this, Mark, you might want to get Heidi to volunteer to give you a presentation sometime. She would be an excellent choice to do that. Yeah, okay, thanks a lot. Yeah, so that's really it. I just wanted to do that to kind of a bit of icebreaker, a bit of fun. So let's just kick on with our presentation, and let's go from the current slide. So we've talked a bit about IaaS. We broke into a bit about Power BI. Let's talk about PaaS, and let's talk about Synapse. And the traditional design that we have is, well, this is basically, I think, PaaS, but we could take this into Synapse as well. So I've said SSIS here, but it could be ADF, pulling data into a data warehouse, so to speak, and then visualizing it in Power BI or pushing it as SQL Server, whatever you want to do. And so with Synapse, and I guess with Fabric as well, we could have a architecture that looks similar to this. And I've got another rhetorical question for you. Is this an architecture, or is this as I have heard people express before, or is this what we call a marketecture? So if you look at this, we've got like the bronze, silver, the gold, or the raw, the enriched, the curated. So if you go read Databricks documentation, you're going to see to bronze, silver, gold. If you read the Microsoft documentation, you'll see enrich, curate, enrich, curated, whatever. And you don't really have to stick to that. It's a great naming. I think what we really need is like somewhere to land the data, which in this case might be the bronze layer, and somewhere where to visualize the data from, where our data is clean and all nicely set up. And that might be the curated layer or the gold layer. So essentially, I think we need those two things. But what we've got in the middle, do we need one layer? Do we just need silver? Maybe we need 2 or 3. I don't know. You don't have to stick, or I don't feel that you need to stick to this bronze, silver, gold. You can have as many or as few layers as you want. I personally would have at least two, maybe 3, maybe more. Who knows? I just guess the scenario has got to be more expandable. And and do those layers have to all be Delta Parquet, as they might be in Fabric? I mean, can they be JSON files on one hand, Parquet files on another, Delta Parquet files in another? They could be any number of things you like. So anyway, let's move on to our SaaS and talk about Fabric, which is what we're here to really talk about. So Fabric brings, various personas or experiences. So you might hear that word experience tied in with persona. Essentially, does the same thing. We've got our data integration, which you can draw an analogy with ADF. Data engineering, which is now, I'd say, not our warehouse, or our Delta Parquet based files, or we got our traditional data warehouse. We've got real-time analytics mixed up in there with data science, all bundled together in a nice, neat unit. We've got one security. One security hasn't really come along yet. Obviously, there is security there, and you'd be foolish to implement anything like this without security. But I think the one security aspect is going to really shine over the next 3 months or so. And I'd really keep your eye on that angle. So let's go to the demo, and let me fire up my my demo. So let me find where I put it on my screen. We'll go here, we'll go in there, and we'll fire up the demo. Okay, so I'm just going to turn down my sound, because I've got sound on this, but I don't want the sound to play. I want to talk over this as we go along. So we come to Power BI, we come to the Fabric interface to start with, and obviously the home screen. We're presented with, an array of experiences or personas that we can dive into, and we literally have to dive into one to start off with. So let's dive into, I would say, the first one we do. We'll hit the switcher down the bottom, and we'll dive into Power BI. So we're in the Power BI interface to start off with. Now, the first thing we need to do is actually create a workspace. So if we were in Power BI, the first thing we need to do is create a workspace in Power BI. That's what we need to do in Fabric as well. So let's go ahead and do that. So we hit new workspace. We get the fly up for the new workspace. We give that a name. It doesn't really matter what the name is here. And some choices we've got are in the advanced section down the bottom. Now, if you got a trial, you probably haven't paid particular attention to this, but let me go over it. So you can pick trial if you want to pick trial. I thought when I started off this, I'm doing Power BI, I'm going to pick Power BI Pro. So I picked Power BI Pro, and I was like, away I go. So I knew I wanted to do Fabric, and I knew I wanted to do notebooks and all that, but I just picked Power BI Pro because that's what I know. And I thought I could do everything else in there. So now what I want to do is switch over to my data factory, and I want to create a data pipeline. So I go hit data pipeline, and it says, oh, you're basically going to do something that Power BI doesn't really support. Well, Power BI Pro doesn't support anyway. You're going to do something here that Power BI Pro doesn't want you to do. So either upgrade to a free Fabric trial or do something else. So what I'm going to actually do is do something else. You can't just upgrade to a Fabric trial if you wanted, and that would give you enough capacity which is a word you probably hear a lot in Fabric. That will give you enough capacity to do things like data warehousing and ADF or data factory or notebooks or whatever you want. So anyway, I'm going to go back to my workspace and I'm going to change that capacity. So I'm going to go premium. And the choices I've only got there, sorry, I'm just going to go back in that video just a touch. So the choices I've got there are, let's see, a big quick to press the pause button. So I could go pro, I can go premium per user, which we know about already from Power BI, but I don't really have any other options. So I could go to trial, but I don't really want to go to trial. I want to kind of set up my own Fabric capacity that I own. So in order to do that, you're going to need access to the portal. It's probably the only time that you're going to have to hop into the portal here. So obviously you need your account to be configured with an Azure account as well. So in this case, that's set up. So I'm hopped over to the portal with my own account and I've gone to Fabric. You can type it in this case I had a shortcut there, but you just type it in. And here you can see that I've actually set up previously a whole load of capacities. And you can pause these capacities so you don't get charged, or you can resume them. But what I want to do here, I actually want to create a brand new one. So I hit create. I pick my resource group the same as you would. I give it a name. Note that the name can't contain uppercase characters. It's case sensitive. It's got to contain lowercase characters. If you do that, you'll get a warning. So we create our capacity with lowercase, and then we can go to the size. Now, can I pause this? So now we get to pick the capacity we want to pick. And they're all based on FSCs. Now, these prices are quite old, and they're in New Zealand dollars. So just ignore the actual pricing at the moment. But the F64, which this is going to set up, is pretty much comparable to a P1 SKU in Power BI. So that's what I'm actually going to pick here. If you do create a capacity like that, you get all the benefits of what you'd expect with Power BI Premium. If you set up the capacity below F64, any Power BI user who goes to your system will need a Power BI Pro license. But that's just the way it is. So there's certain trade-offs in there, but we maybe talk about these after this session. But I'm going to pick an F64, and that's going to be my capacity that we're going to use for this demo and move forward. So I simply just select it, I create it. It'll literally take a couple of seconds to a couple of minutes to create. And there you go. We've got our capacity. Our capacity is there now. It's set up. We can pause it if we want. We can change it if we want. And so let's hop over back now to the Fabric. So capacity set up. We've just got to go into our workspace and change it. So back to where we go normally, back to our workspace, hit the premium tab. Now our Fabric capacity is lit up. We can choose the capacity we've got there. It'll give us a choice of creating anything that we've got active at the moment. We simply just apply. And now our workspace is using that capacity. Now, another thing I've got, another setting you could explore here is the domain. So the domain's really just, a label to say this is what my warehouse, notebook, whatever is about, Lakehouse, whatever is about. So I created one called wildlife, and that's what I'm actually going to use. I'm going to call it wildlife. I'm going to set that up. That's going to be our domain, and we're ready to go. Now, just a very quick note, why have I called it wildlife? So I've called it wildlife because this demo is based on a demo from, a tutorial from Microsoft. And that tutorial deals with the details about the Serengeti, about wildlife in the Serengeti. It's publicly available, and I kind of took the view that I'd use that as my inspiration for this session, so that people could basically go to that tutorial and follow through pretty much the steps that I'm going through here. I've obviously just embellished it a little bit and changed a few things, but essentially it's the same, like, you know. So I'll post that link in the chat as we progress. And so now we want to go back to our data engineering, and what we want to do is set up a lakehouse. Now we're going to set the lakehouse up because this is going to be the destination for the data that we're going to bring in here. So we tried to set pipeline up and it didn't work. Now we set a lakehouse up as the destination. So you can see we get files and we get tables. More on those later. So now this is going to be our destination. So now we can go back to Data Factory. So what we're going to do with Data Factory is we are going to set up a very simple pipeline to pull some files from a remote location, which is basically a publicly available blob storage, and bring those files across and put them in the files section of our data lake. Now the files are just basically, I think there's 11 zip files. Each zip file contains a single JSON file. So as we bring those across, we're going to, with Data Factory, we're going to bring them across, we're going to unzip them, and we're going to land a JSON file in our lakehouse. So let's go and do that. We will create our pipeline this time. There won't be any problem about this. So we'll just call it pipeline 1 for want of a better thing to call it. And the first thing we're going to do, we're just going to add a single activity, and that's going to be a for each loop. And it's going to be a for each loop because we're going to iterate through some files, and for each one we're going to copy some data from our source to our destination. So we actually know in advance what we're going to copy, so I've just pasted it in there. So it's quite a little bit simplistic just because it's a demo. Obviously in real life you might not know the names, but in the demo environment, yeah, we know what we're going to copy, and we're going to iterate through them and copy. So the biggest thing we really need to do is set up our source and set up our destination. So the first thing we'll do is look at the copy data and the source for that. And that's going to be a blob storage. We're going to set up a new source. It's going to be blob storage. We can just slim down blob storage in the list, and we get it there. I've already created it, so we just go OK, and it says, right, this is it. We know you go to blob storage. We know basically the container. We know the directory, and we want to dynamically choose the item, which we've got from our previous step. We just need to put that in. Pretty straightforward. We know where we go. This is a big setting here. So we've hit on settings, and we've chose zip deflate. So what zip deflate is going to do is, from our destination, it's going to grab a zip file, it's going to bring it across, and it's going to deflate zip and unzip whatever's in there and put it on the file section of our lakehouse. Now it's just going to be a single JSON file. Like I say, fairly simplistic because it's a demo, but it's one zip file. So I'm bringing across 11 zip files. Each zip file contains one JSON file. So I should end up in my lakehouse with 11 JSON files. So we'll set that. So that's our source. Our source is now taken care of. So now what we need to do is our destination. So we're going to choose the lakehouse that we set up. Now we've seen in our lakehouse there were two nodes we've got there. We've got tables and we've got files. So any file that lands in our lakehouse that is in the format of Delta Parquet, any file in that format will be recognized as a table. Any other file is just a file. So the JSON files that are in there will just appear as files at the moment. We're not going to create any kind of warehouse, lakehouse, whatever straight off. We're going to have to do some massaging down the track. So, but this is the destination we want. We want to drop them in the raw data folder, and we just got a bit of dynamic content there to create the name of the file, which is basically the name of the file with the zip file with the zip extension taken off. So that's kind of it, and we've got our binary settings. So we don't need to do any other settings here. That's kind of it. So we set our file, we set our source, we set our destination. We'll validate what we set up. It validates perfectly, and we're just going to run it. So yeah, obviously this is a recording, but it validates and runs in a few minutes. And we can see here that these are basically not the files are brought in, but these are the files that are in the workspace. So what we're going to do now, we can see that one of these is our pipeline. And which one is our pipeline here? Data pipeline. So third from the bottom, we've got our data pipeline there. The other files that are in here, I'll explain them as we go along. We've got our Lakehouse, and when we set up a Lakehouse, we actually get our Lakehouse, which you'd expect to get. You get a SQL endpoint, and you also get a semantic model by default. So the semantic model was called a data set up till about November, and now it's called a semantic model. It's essentially a default data set. So that's what you get when you create a Lakehouse. I've created some notebooks up here, which we're going to go and have a look at over the next 5 minutes or so. And we've got basically in our Lakehouse at the moment, we should have a load of JSON files. So we're going to click on our Lakehouse and go over and have a look at it. And we can see that there we've got our raw data container, which we set up, which we said we wanted to be the location of our JSON files. And we've got 11 JSON files in our raw data directory. So we want to massage those now, and we want to turn those into tables. So what are we going to do? How are we going to do that? So we're actually going to do that with a notebook. And we're going to go up and we're going to click on Open Notebook. And we're going to say we want, I'm picking an existing notebook. You can create a new notebook. I'll talk about this notebook here. Yeah, so this is our notebook. So essentially, if you were to do the demo yourself, you would get the second cell. So the second cell that we've got there, I'll just forward this on a bit and see if I see if the demo goes to the second cell. But essentially what this notebook is going to do is take those raw data files. So it's going to take those raw data files that are JSON files, and it's going to eventually transform them into tables. But it's going to do that in a two-step process. So first of all, it's going to take the JSON files and it's going to interrogate them, and it's going to create a set of parquet files. So that's parquet files, not delta parquet files. So the difference between a delta parquet file and a parquet file, just to be really simplistic, is the delta parquet file contains basically a history of changes, what has changed in that parquet file, whereas the parquet file itself does not contain that. So you might do this in one step, but for demo purposes, I'm doing this in two steps. So I'm going to run that cell. This notebook, it generally would take you about 2 or 3 minutes to run, but we won't do that here. And it creates a new folder called data. And inside that data folder, we're going to see, well, I'm showing the tables at the moment, but I will actually just rewind that a little bit. So maybe rewind that a bit too much. Dive over to our, oh, hang on, did I? Yeah, okay, so I run the notebook. It creates a folder called data, and within that data folder, don't worry if I don't display it here, we'll go over to the finished article and have a look. Within the data folder, we're going to have some parquet files, and within the table section, we're going to have a load of tables. Now, these tables, they're essentially very analogous to database tables. They essentially are, but I guess most people are kind of thinking SQL tables. They're basically files. They're basically delta parquet files. So there's a delta parquet file called categories. There's one called test annotations, one called test images, etc. So there's 5 of them, and they display in here as tables. And that's essentially all there is to it. So what we need to do now is go and create a model from those from those Delta Parquet files. So I'm going to head across to our Serengeti composite, to our from the, let me go back a bit because that went too quick for me. So I'm going to create my report. So I'll go back into our, and I picked the SQL endpoint. I don't know if that was too quick. I picked the SQL endpoint. We can have a look at this setup later. But I picked the SQL endpoint. And if you look down the bottom, you will see where my cursor is at the moment. You'll see three options. We've got a data tab, which we're obviously showing at the minute, which clearly shows the data. Or we can create a query, or we can create a model. And creating a model is what we actually want to do here. So we're going to move forward and we're going to create the model. First of all, probably just going to look at the data, click on query. Obviously, we can create a query, click on model. That's the model. This is where we do our model. Okay, so looks fairly familiar, looks pretty much like what you'd expect to see in Power BI, but it's all online. It's it's not Power BI desktop. It might look like Power BI desktop a bit, but it's actually online. So here I've just clicked on one of the relationships. Let me just go back. Just clicked on one of the relationships. Tells you all about it. You drag and drop these. That's how I created them. And then we've got our model. Essentially, we want to create our model based on 4 tables from the tables that we've created in a Lakehouse. And from there, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to the top. I'm going to create a new report. So the report's going to be based on that model. And it's going to be a really simple report. It's, you're not going to look at this report and go, well, Martin's great at Power BI. You might obviously get a different opinion. So I'll drop on two cards. I drop in a few text boxes. I drop on a few graphics, pretty standard Power BI stuff that you might want to do. And that's it. So I've created the Power BI report actually in the service. That's pretty much all there is to it. I can now save that. So I just save it. I can go out, look at what it would look like in reading view, which is basically the Power BI report. I can export it. I can share it. But pretty much everything you would normally do within Power BI. I've got the link now. You can see the news that was active at the time I recorded this. Bit irrelevant. I can edit it. I can hit on edit, and there we are. It's kind of done. So let's go over and let's actually have a look at the finished article, which I should have. I thought I actually did have open here. It's normally fairly responsive. So let's go into our Power BI. Let's go. One of the things that actually got me when I started using this was, if we go back to the Fabric page, you'll notice that from the entry point, if you like, from the entry point, I can't just pick a workspace. So what I want to do now is just pick my Serengeti workspace, but I actually can't do that from the start. What I've got to do is go into one of these personas. So I'm just going to go into Power BI just because it's the first one. And then I get the option to pick a workspace, and I can pick a workspace from here, and I can go complete Serengeti, which is basically the demo that we've just done. And I'll see all the files that I put in there. Some of these are above and beyond the demo that I've done. Basically, if you do follow that demo through, it goes on to create machine learning models and examine pictures and all that sort of thing. I kind of find a few issues with it, which is why I didn't want to do it here. But yeah, essentially what you see in here is all the things that I've just created, and there's a bit of rubbish in here. There's the report. So if I click on the report, that will open up, and it should be the Power BI report that we just created. It's taken a little bit of time, which is why I didn't want to do this live. But you can see it's spinning its wheels a bit now. It's obviously opened up pretty big, and from there we can go into edit mode. We can edit that report. We get the familiar visualizations in the data box, pretty much what you'd expect to see in Power BI. We can go over to our workspace, back to our workspace, and you'll see all our files again. I messed around getting Fabric to just create a report, just whatever report you want, just go and auto create one. It did. It was a bit meaningless, but it looked fairly nice, but it wasn't not that meaningful. I guess the last thing I want to point out was when I started this, I created a capacity. So let's just go over and look at that capacity again before we wrap up, which we'll do in the next 5 minutes or so. We'll head to our Fabric capacities, and I set this up last night. So this is the capacity we use in the San Fran pass. Now let me just pause that. So that capacity is now paused. So what effect does that have on the solution that I've just created? So we'll wait for that to actually pause, which it should do fairly soon. So this is interesting to me, like, you know, in Synapse, let's say you create a serverless SQL pool, you can just go and pause that pool. Sorry, you don't need to pause a serverless one. A dedicated one you might want to pause, and that'll save you money there. You might have already created your Power BI and sucked it in at that point, and that's all cool. So you're not playing for the Synapse sort of capacity, and you can carry on using Power BI. So I was kind of curious what happens to all these files. Now let me just refresh this page. So the capacity that I was using, it hasn't caught up. Let me ensure that that capacity is actually paused. Okay, so it is paused. Actually, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to actually delete it. So I've paused it. Actually, I'll delete it. And it'll take a couple of seconds to delete. Should be just as quick. Yes, I did. Resource is being deleted. What I want to point out is the effect that deleting a capacity has on your files. Because the first time I did this, I was really surprised, and it sent me into panic mode a little bit. So this should delete in a couple of minutes. So essentially, I won't spoil it. Well, maybe I will spoil it for a surprise if this doesn't take too long to create. Essentially, at the moment, we can see all of my files. It's deleted. So you'll notice now you can see far less files than you could before the capacity was deleted. And initially I was like, I have lost all my work. What has happened to it? But then I went and recreated capacity and attached it back, and they all came back. So essentially what I think is happening in the background, it kind of almost being hidden from you or soft deleted, or you can't see them, and you can't see them because basically you can't do anything with them. But they're still there. They're still there, and yeah, they're all controlled. Now you could, if you wanted, you can go back to your workspace settings, and you can if I go back to, well, I can go to Git integration. I can tie this up to a Git workspace, and if I then change a file, my source control icon will go red. I'll see I've changed the file. I can check it in. It integrates really nicely into Git itself, and everything, well, the majority of things you could want are synced with Git. The one thing that's really missing at the moment, which I guess they're going to work on, and I guess they're going to bring out as soon as they possibly can, is the integration between data pipelines, so basically Data Factory, and Git. So there's no integration there between the two. That is due to come, I think, by the end of March. So that's Q1. I read the roadmap. So the roadmap's publicly available. I read that, and it should be there by the end of March. So that's basically that's basically end-to-end Fabric, and I don't know if that's 60 minutes or 70 minutes or just over, probably under. But yeah, so if anyone's got any questions or put anything in the chat, happy to discuss, take questions, whatever you want. If anyone's got any questions or put anything in the chat, happy to discuss, take questions, whatever you want. Just wanted to bring your attention to a few things that are kind of happening in the community. And one of those is